On this week's episode of The Tangent, Father Sam and I sit down with Dr. Jared Staudt, the editor, co-editor of The American Catholic Land Movement, with Jason Craig, another former guest of The Tangent, and we discuss a whole bunch of things. We touch on the historicity of the Exodus because Dr. Staudt is spearheading the Exodus U program for Exodus 90. We talk about why returning to the land is so important, especially within the context of the family and why families need to pray together and commune together and how this helps that. We discuss why, in that vein, it's so important for kids to get off screens and to engage in nature. We discuss how one can do this if you don't live in the country, if you live in the burbs, or if you live in the city. And then last but not least, we also discuss some of Dr. Staudt's personal experiences with Bishop Eric Varden, with Robert Cardinal Seurat, and with Pope St. John Paul II. So it's a pretty jam-packed episode, and it's a fun one. We really enjoyed having Dr. Staudt on the show, and I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of The Tangent.
My name is Father Sam Kachuba, and I think Matt knew that I was going to do that. He saw it. He saw me in the camera. He saw me planning to talk, and I jumped in, and I couldn't help myself.
It's okay. You win this time. You win this round.
I've been wanting
but my
to do
name
this for
remains
so many
Matt
episodes.
Sperazza.
I'm Father Sam Kachuba.
Next time, I'll let you start. We are joined today by Dr. Jared Staudt. He serves as the director of content for Exodus 90, as well as an instructor for St. John Vianney Seminary Lay Division. He earned his PhD in systematic theology. I found that online in like one singular source, what it was in, from Ave Maria University. Hopefully it's correct. He is the editor of the American Catholic Land Movement, past, present, and future. The author of How the Eucharist Can Save Civilization through 10 books. Both of those were through 10 books. Restoring Humanity, essays on the evangelization of culture through Divine Providence Press. I'm going to name every single publisher. The Beer Option through Angelico Press. Renewing Catholic Schools, How to Regain a Catholic Vision in a Secular Age, Catholic Education Press, and The Primacy of God, The Virtue of Religion and Catholic Theology, Emmaus Academic. The point of me saying all those publishers is that if you read any book from any Catholic publisher, Dr. Jared Staudt probably has a book through them, so you can find him wherever you go. He's also, I already said he's the director of Exodus 90, the creative director. Is that right? Director of content for Exodus 90.
Yeah.
And last but certainly not least, he and his wife have 6 kids, and he is a Benedictine oblate. Did I pronounce that last word correctly?
Yes.
You did.
Okay, I'm just making sure.
A
Dr.
lot
Staudt.
of people say oblate. It's true.
Yes, I was tempted to, but deep down I knew it was oblate. Are you also, just before we even jump into the American Catholic Land Movement, which I'm really, really interested in, are you spearheading Exodus U?
Yes, I am.
Okay. All right. Do you want to give us a pitch on what that is real fast?
Yeah, absolutely. Exodus 90 grew out of seminary formation. It was like a spiritual boot camp for new seminarians. Can you get your life in order, learn how to pray more deeply, engage in asceticism, especially pulling back from technology and building fraternity with other men. And it's proved so fruitful. But, thinking back to seminary formation, Jamie Baxter, our founder, has always said, well, there's just another component here that's always been missing, and that's deeper intellectual formation. And so starting this year, we've launched a whole new component of Exodus 90 called Exodus U. And right now we're doing a deep dive into the historical reality of the Exodus. And so we're kind of taking a sacramental approach, looking at, the church fathers and how they approach the Exodus, but also what new archaeological evidence tells us about the historicity of the Exodus. So it's been a lot of fun.
Is there one like killer point for the historicity of the Exodus?
Yes, I think that if you date the Exodus correctly, and the Bible actually points us to roughly 1450 BC, not the time of Ramses. Forget about it, right? If you look then, there's no evidence. But when you date it correctly, there's all kinds of evidence. And I think the destruction of Jericho, right about 1400 BC, and of course there's controversies about when to date that, but everything starts to fall into place, right, when you get the date correct.
Nice. Cool. All right, sweet. That's just a little preview. That's a preview for the Tangent listeners for Exodus U.
Yeah.
Go
Now,
sign up.
I very much want to talk about this American Catholic Land Movement, but Matt just dropped a book title in there in that list that I have to stop and say, tell me about the beer option. I know that might seem strange coming from the priest, but tell me please about the beer option.
Yes, so it's an extension of the Benedict option. Why? Because Benedictine monks invented beer as we know it.
Yeah.
right? And, it's going back to the Exodus, right? The ancient Egyptians brewed, the ancient Israelites brewed. And shakar was a barley-based substance that was part of Israel's daily sacrifice. So beer's in the Bible. We're just not translating it correctly. But the beer that we drink, I mean, it's a historic fact that Benedictine monks built the first large-scale brewery with modern brewing techniques in the world. And so I go into the whole history of brewing, but then also what Catholic brewing can teach us about culture right now. And that is, of course, getting back to the land. If you look at like Mount Angel Abbey, they're even growing some of their ingredients. We look at local community growing up around microbrewing, even like stimulating the local economy, but men kind of coming together and building community. And so I lay out principles for Catholic drinking, which I say should be done through feasting, fasting, and friendship. So you get some Exodus 90 in there, the fasting
Nice.
component.
Yeah,
We have
yeah, yeah.
penitential seasons, maybe pulling back from drinking during Lent.
Right.
But ultimately, we drink, as we do all things for the glory of God, in communion with others. And if you follow those principles, feasting, fasting, and friendship, you'll be drinking like a Catholic.
Nice.
Very
Let me
nice.
tell you something. That was a fantastic pitch. That was a great pitch. I mean, there was like a little, like the cadence at the end. It was great. You did a great job. I think that there's a pretty natural connection there to the American Catholic land movement, right? Like you said, like the growing of your own ingredients, and then the brewing itself. So let's just jump right into that. What is the American Catholic land movement?
Well, historically speaking, the Catholic land movement grew out of the early 20th century. Why? Because it's right around that time. I think it's even like 1918 or something like that, where you have a majority of the U.S. population, moving into the cities for the first time. So there's a huge demographic shift in the early 20th century. But then what else do you have? Economic collapse. And so everybody's saying we need to go back to the land. And you have Chesterton and Belloc, doing that in Great Britain. And you actually have a group of people doing it in the United States. You have the Catholic Rural Life Conference. You also have the Catholic Worker Movement. I mean, Dorothy Day and Peter Myron saying it. You have figures involved in the liturgical movement, like Father Virgil, who's doing it as well, out of St. John's Abbey in Minnesota. So that's historically speaking the Catholic land movement. But what we're doing in this book is saying, let's broaden that out. The American Catholic land movement actually starts when the Spanish come into present day, territory of the United States and start consecrating the land in the name of God. And the very first Catholic mission in the United States down in St. Augustine was the name of God mission, right? Because they didn't claim the land in the name of Spain. They said, we're claiming this in the name of God. And then you look at, Santa Fe, the settlements and the missions in Texas and later in California. You have the French coming in from the north and even navigating the Mississippi, which they named the River of the Immaculate Conception. And so Catholics have been in this particular place for a long time, 500 years, really trying to bring Catholic culture within it, engaging the land and the people, right? If you look at the way in which Catholics even engaged with the native population, they were trying to build communion with them, right? Not just pushing them away, right? And we're going to have the beatification of the Florida martyrs. Many of them are native martyrs. And that's going to be a great sign for a different vision for the founding of America. Not incompatible with the other, but it gives us a different angle. And then we look at even then all of the waves of immigrants who came into the United States and helped to populate, the Midwest and the West, and the way in which Catholics did that very intentionally. Okay, then we get into the land movement proper. But then, you look at the 1960s and, I even mentioned the hippies in the introduction, right? People started saying, modern life stinks in the sense that, it's become so abstract, it's removed from nature, it's becoming inhuman, and even our food is becoming poisonous. We need to do things differently. And so you begin to see, these alternative movements of people saying that we need to, I think, approach the land differently. We need to, once again, have another movement of getting back to it. You have figures like Wendell Berry, who's influenced a lot of Catholics, John Sr. as well, who are kind of like guiding lights of that particular part of the land movement. then I think even post-COVID now, we're kind of like what I even call like the fifth act. You look at these different parts of the movement, right? And now, once again, people are saying we need to get out of these crazy cities that are too expensive. There's too much traffic. There's too much crime. And we don't have strong communities, even when you're in these population centers. And so people are starting to say, let's move out. Let's form intentional communities. I left Denver in that time period, and now I'm in Western North Carolina living with friends in the area here. And so I think remote work, and so I work remotely with Exodus 90, it's enabling people to say, what's a better way to live? What's a more human way to live right now? And can we build Catholic community? And that's a key element of the land movement. You might open it up and think land, but actually it's community, community, community. And wherever you are, cities, suburbs, the country, that's, I think, what we need right now to build intentional Catholic community.
As you're describing those early Catholics in this country, and how there is a massive difference in the way that the first Catholics came and engaged versus other things. There's a great book about the European, it's called Continental Ambitions. And it talks about the different ways that different countries approached the New World. And it's a really fascinating thing. And there's not one country that approached it perfectly, obviously, but there's so much nuance and depth to it when you really start to get into that history. Can you speak a little bit more to how those early Catholics were trying to form community? We're trying to become more part of, or to engage more with the populations that they were finding here.
I mean, I think St. Augustine is fascinating because, the territory of Florida, which of course originally stretched all into the eastern United States, but even just what we know as Florida today, it became a place where freed slaves could go and find safety. And you have like Fort Mose and St. Augustine, which was the first free Black community in the current territory of the United States. And even the first recorded wedding of St. Augustine was a biracial marriage. It's just a different vision. Why did the Seminoles, go down to Florida? It was because they could be free there, right? And so there definitely was a sense in which when Catholics came, they weren't thinking, we're the only ones here, everybody else needs to get out. It was, how can we build communion with other people? And like I said, I think that the beatification of the Florida martyrs is going to be very significant. The missions are also much maligned, but they were actually self-governing communities under the direction of the Padres, of course. But, they were actually really strong societies. The people were educated there. They learned the crafts and trades. They learned agriculture. And the missions did well when they were left alone, right? And of course, they were even suppressed when, like California, for instance, became part of Mexico. The Mexican government was very secular, and so they actually were the first to suppress many of the missions. But the missions were created to protect the native population from colonization. So there's definitely, I think, in the Catholic settlement, whether it's the French or the Spanish, you definitely have a sense of we're entering into a space that we need to engage with the people who live here. Maybe we can find common ground and build, a common society. And of course, there was also these expressions in the mission of a very intentional Catholic culture that didn't cast away native culture, but you can even see, like, I have a CD of Catholic music from the missions of California. And even that was a cultural blending. And so we really see that even the native arts and music could thrive in those settings.
So, I'm tracking the emphasis on community. But it's not called the American Catholic Community Movement, and so, like, there is some level whereby, like, you're encouraged to homestead, if you will, and so I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, and it's a suburb, and my father is from Queens, and my mother is from the Bronx, and so we did not grow many plants growing up. Nor did I have a dog or anything. I think like I had a bunny, and it lived
Did you really?
outside. I had one bunny. Yes, it escaped many times.
Where did it
Um,
go? Right.
we would like try. This is a total tangent. We would like put it in like a little pen, basically, but it was the kind of fencing that is crisscrossing and there's holes. I don't remember what it's called. And so it would just sneak through those holes, and I would have to go chase it. That doesn't matter. The point is that, like, as I read this book, this compilation of essays, I would be lying to you if I said like I didn't feel drawn to the land. Like it is enticing, and simultaneously, to an extent, it feels a little hopeless because I'm like, man, I don't even like forget a cow, I've never owned a dog, and so as someone who's actually genuinely interested, like jokes aside, what are like practicals for incorporating this, knowing that again, like it very well may be like, hey, introduce your family, move to a place of intentional community, things like that.
I would say that there are aspects of the book that presuppose maybe you're not living in the land. For instance, Dr. Shepard has a chapter on hunting and fishing in particular, and as land management and conservation. So there are certainly ways in which people in the city can and even
participate.
should
Right.
engage with the land. Like for me, I grew up in the suburbs, but we did board horses kind of just a little bit farther out. We did gardening and things like that. But I would say my biggest exposure to the land and to what my co-editor Jason Craig calls the liturgy of the land. He has a book with that title that actually gets
we
into
interviewed him for that book, actually.
Yeah, he gets into a lot of the practicals of what would this really entail. But I learned the liturgy of the land through Boy Scouting, back when it really was Boy Scouting, right? And I would say that, like for me, like the proto-gospel was just getting out into the wilderness through scouting and reading the Lord of the Rings, because I was a non-practicing Catholic. But to me, like that's how the Lord prepared me to receive the gospel. But that's significant because what it's saying is that, I mean, there's like a primal vocation to engage with the land that everybody has. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion. And so that's a call for everyone. So how do we exercise that dominion? And, artists do that in a particular way, right? You're painting, with particular pigments that are the fruit of the earth, right? That are harvested from the earth and prepared. And it's an expression of creativity to be like a co-creator with God. So gardening can do that. I mean, I have felt that gardening, raising animals can be that. But I would say even just for children's sake, like the American Catholic Land Movement is urgent in the sense that kids need to put down technology. They need to get outside. They need to even learn in connection with nature. They need to do hard things, right? To be pushed outside of the normal boundaries of home living, even if it's just camping, hiking, maybe there is some communal gardening. But I would say go to places like Clear Creek, where I'm an oblate. Like they're doing permaculture there, and monasteries are particularly good at following that liturgy of the land. Like when I lived in Colorado, it was St. Walburga's, a monastery of nuns up near the Wyoming border, where, they're really living that, raising meat and dairy and things like that. So I would say that kids need to, get outside urgently, but then we can also take them on pilgrimages, to the old mission sites, to living monasteries to get into this liturgy.
Yeah. I'm glad you put it that way, because the other thing that struck me in these essays was the emphasis on natural order. And at first I was like, this is basically suggesting a natural law morally. And then as I thought about it a little more, I was like, actually, it's just taking the incarnation seriously. Like Father Sam, I don't remember the exact story, but you had a professor in seminary that, what was it? He would say, the incarnation happened. Everything flows from that.
I would love to say that was my professor. It was a legend of a professor who began his every class and ended every class with the incarnation. But yeah, it's exactly to that point though, Matt, the importance of the incarnate reality that we have when we get stuck on those screens and everything's sort of mediated by a piece of electronic technology instead of like us actually being in the world, we can lose sight of that incarnate component.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Jared, to get out, go outside, be out there, do hard things, do the things that are challenging. So Matt, your cousin Michael has talked to me many times about going fishing, and I think we
Mm-hmm.
we
That doesn't
agreed that we
surprise me.
needed, yeah, we agreed that we needed to take you one day. So we'll take you fishing, and we'll get into it.
My
Now,
reputation precedes me.
yeah, I've not had a chance to dive into the book. Jared, does he talk about a particular form of fishing that's superior to all others? Like,
Are you thinking of fly fishing? Or
that's
no?
exactly what. Okay, good. I wanted you to say that fly fishing is superior to all the others. Yes. Uh,
Now, in Colorado and now also in Western North Carolina where I live, this is some of the best fly fishing territory right in the country, both places. So
yeah.
I've been around it. Can't say that I've perfected the art myself, but I
I
just
don't
kind
think
of
you ever do. Don't worry.
yeah, that's right. It's a life project.
Yeah.
But I would say, my favorite chapter in the book is the one on John Senior.
Mhm.
Who the famous convert and teacher at the University of Kansas. His integrated humanities program led to about 300 converts, including my good friend Bishop James Conley. But his method was poetic knowledge. And that is, you have to experience the reality of things. You can't just learn about them, secondhand, abstractly. You got to get your hands dirty into things to really learn them. And that was so transformative for his students. And I would say, even just in terms of getting outside, right? In his book, The Restoration of Christian Culture, he says, smash the TV. I think if he were
Mm.
alive today, it would be smash the smartphone, but he's like,
Yeah.
smash the TV. But he says, like, get outside, garden, go to the monastery. Some of the things that I was saying, like, that's classic, John Senior, immerse yourself in reality.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Was he a John Prine fan? Because the Spanish Pipe Dream song by John Prine. Blow up your TV, throw
I,
away the paper, move to the country, build you a home, plant a little
it
garden,
sounds
eat a lot
like
of
they're very
peaches.
simpatico, if nothing more. Right?
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's great. Um, all right, we want to get outside, right? We want to get out and connect with reality. We want to connect with the nature around us. We're living in a culture that's often really afraid of what's out there, that kind of sees threats lurking around every corner. Now, there's something very grounding about when there's really a threat lurking around the corner versus the things that often feel like they might be a threat. Um, I had a chance to do a sabbatical out in Wyoming a couple years ago, and the beauty was not having internet access for significant chunks of time, and basically the phone being turned into nothing more than a camera that was with me a lot. It was wonderful. Um, but then you go out and you realize that if I wander too far from the main compound of the ranch, there's bears, or there's the possibility of running into some kind of pretty significant wildlife that we've got to be careful of. And you go out and you find these places where there's actual danger. The beauty was it stops being scary.
Mm.
It becomes more just this is reality, and this is something real. Given our very connected, at least technologically connected culture, and our so often our tendency to stay indoors to try to protect and make sure that there's no exposure to danger, how do we help people to break out and confront the things that, yes, are real dangers and challenges, and yet don't have to be threats to us?
Yeah, isn't it interesting that we're paranoid about threats to the body and to our health, and yet we've completely given in to interior threats? And there might be a relationship there, right? We're completely out of tune with life and death, hot and cold, hardship
Mm.
and sweat and all of these things. And yet we're now completely susceptible to these deeper threats that are actually spiritual. So we're just completely out of whack. And I think part of that is being so far removed from God's creation. That is the book of nature, which God established as the foundation for teaching us not just about life, but even about Him.
Mm.
Like, we have a hard time understanding scripture because we don't understand the book of nature that it's all based upon, that is the original revelation. And Jason Craig, again, my co-editor, he has a book, Leaving Boyhood Behind, on rites of passage, right, and becoming men. And those rites of passage in primitive cultures often are very dangerous, and many times they even leave, the initiate scarred or disfigured, but then prepared to face the difficulties of life. And so children need adversity, right? And we're so used to removing them from any adversity, but they actually need to face it, because that is how you move from childhood to adulthood. And we have a society of children, right? Not in the good sense that our Lord said, right? The purity and the innocence, right? But children who are not able to enter into the hard things of life, and therefore miss actually the deepest joys of life. There's nothing harder, and it's important for men to remember this, right, than childbirth. So, the women have it hardest, right? And yet it is the thing that is, the most fulfilling. Of course, the hardship doesn't end with birth, of course, right? As parents really know, right? It's just the beginning, right? Even harder things await as parents. But, you have to sacrifice in order to even have the feast that we were talking about earlier, right? There's no feast, or, what does the letter to the Hebrews say? There's no forgiveness of sins without the shedding of blood. And when you are on the land, right, you understand the cost of things. How difficult is it to actually raise food? What is the cost of your dinner? Even with the sacrifice of animals, we like to slaughter pigs communally around here. So whenever there's an important event, right, we slaughter pigs, and you really see what is even behind the things of life that we take for granted. And so, how much have we sacrificed for the good things of life? And without that sacrifice, we're really missing the fruit. We're not even able to enter into the joy of the feast, right? That's what Joseph Pieper says in his book, In Tune with Festivity. Can we find someone who is able to feast anymore? Right? He says we have the sham feast, right? He looks at like the party. Well, what is the party? You just jump into this supposed good time, right? Everything is high intensity, pleasure, 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 but then no joy, right? Nothing that really lasts and sets the foundation for a good and fulfilled life of leisure, of entering into the highest things. And it's because we can no longer enter into the hardship of sacrifice. So, yeah, and I would say we also just need to learn how to fire high-powered rifles, right? So when you do encounter that bear, you know how to handle it, right? Isn't that what we need to, not just run away from the difficulty, but learn how to face the difficulty?
Yeah. Yeah. The facing of difficulty, it feels, I know for so many, like the impossible thing. Because difficulty is bad. Danger is bad, but so often I think that's the other component. When you actually look at the difficult thing, when you turn towards it, when you face it, you start to see it for what it actually is, and you're able to overcome it. I've watched this with friends of mine with their kids. They've taught their kids to like articulate, what are you having a hard time with, and why are you having a hard time? Well, my brother won't share this with me, but why is that difficult for you? Because I want him to share this with me. And so the kids learn how to talk it through, and this can be an indoor activity, it can be an outdoor activity, and in some ways it doesn't really matter, but they learn how to say the thing that they're having a hard time with, and they learn that they don't have to be afraid of it. They learn that they don't have to like run away. And I think that on a spiritual level, we do the same thing, don't we? We struggle. I was popped into a Bible study here at my parish last night, and they were talking about this, and the young woman who was leading it was sharing a story about how she asked one of her friends who was really angry. She said, "Have you told God that you're angry with him?" And her friend said, "No." And she said, "You should do that." And the idea of sharing this struggle and telling God, I'm mad at you for that I'm struggling with this, was like a real shock. But it was also a really healthy thing. Here are these difficulties. we bring them to God. But sometimes we think I can't bother God with that because I'm supposed to be able to. I'm supposed to handle this. I'm supposed to know what to do. It doesn't quite work that way. When the bear's coming for you, you're not supposed to know what to do. You're supposed to be scared.
You're supposed to be scared, but on the other hand, if you have faced difficulties in the past, you actually build up a store of knowledge.
Right.
Oh, when I'm in this
Right.
difficult situation, I just act.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not paralyzed because I've been prepared to face it. But yeah, in order to face it, you have to be put in other difficult situations first. And even just to kind of take a step back from, facing that particular predator, I would say that the number one impact in my life in moving to the land is not even, say, economic. Let's say the work that we do together on the land. If I'm going to be really honest, we're pretty much a failure on that point of view, because say, yeah, we're here, we're doing it, but we're doing it badly. Our garden's gone to pots, and failing and raising animals, and so it's like Chesterton said, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing badly, right? But what has been the biggest thing, right? We were talking about going to the land and taking a step back from technology, but moving to the country actually pulls out a lot of distractions from family life. I would say moving to the land has focused us on one another, and it brings to the surface maybe those bears that are just hiding, because families living in the suburbs, maybe in particular, they're so busy. Everybody's going every different direction. You have a million activities, and my kids still have some activities. It's not like they don't do anything, but there's less, right? So we're homeschooling, so we're all here together. They go to a hybrid school twice a week, so they get out of the house too, right? And there's not as many sports. They do some sports, but not as much. And we're here together. And so all of a sudden you see things and have to face things that maybe you wouldn't if everybody was just so busy going different directions. And so that's why I said community really is the center.
Right.
And even if you're not in the country, I think the land movement actually can teach you some things. Like, how can we be more intentional with use of technology? How can we build an actual household? So John Cuddeback has this thing on the spiritual homestead. Okay, fine. Yeah, he's focused on the homestead, but what about the spiritual household for everyone? And there's actually a lot you can do. My wife told me yesterday, she said, I think I did more homesteading things when we lived in the suburbs. Because in a way she had to. We were in the suburbs, right? You had to force yourself to do some of the things. And now we're here and there's, I got to fix this. I got to do that. And we're not as intentional about that. But on the other hand, we like I said, we're kind of face to face, and dealing with maybe more family issues, even health issues. We discovered my son has celiac. And I think, things like that, we're so much more in tune with food, what we're eating,
Right.
and watching each other and be like, hey, I think you're struggling with something. Let's look into that. Oh, it's celiac, That's just one little example, but I think that's, to me, been the biggest fruit of the move.
Right.
Short of being able to move out to the country, like if you're in the suburbs, if you're in the city, how can we cultivate that so that that community connection can really happen, so that we can pay attention to the people who are close by? If you're way out in the countryside, it might be because you see another person. Like, if drive out to someplace that's really, really rural and you start waving at all the cars because you've only seen one in the last 2 hours. So I better wave so that somebody saw my vehicle. And if they wave back, I know at least I was seen, But
That sounds like
sense
Wyoming
also,
again, Father.
yeah, a little bit. But then also that sense of being connected with other people, you can, because there's not as many people, you kind of take note of each other and everything. But back in the suburbs or back in the city, we fall back into that. There's lots of things. I got to get in the car and drive to this place or that place, or the famous New York City apartment story of, oh yeah, I think that guy lives in my building, but I've never seen him before. I never talked to him. I don't know his name. I'm not sure which apartment he's in. I think he's on the same floor as me though. How do we cultivate that sense of, maybe it's not back to the land per se, but back
neighborliness.
Yeah, exactly, Matt. Exactly.
Yeah, I think it has to start just within the home first. Can you get good practices within the home? So, and that's prayer. The foundation of Catholic culture is prayer. So, praying at least once a day, preferably more than once a day as a family, right? In the morning, at night, start the day, end the day with prayer together. Whether it's Lectio Divina, Liturgy of the Hours, the Rosary, all the above, whatever it is, like get into that rhythm, into that habit. That's how you begin to form your household. But then the family has an economic reality. Like, how do we spend our money? How do we use our time? And so, even in the city, you can get in touch with where your food comes from and be more intentional about healthy living as a family. Be more involved in the food preparation together, eating meals together, right? The family meal is like the sacrament of the family, And so, getting back to that, why do I start there? Because then you have the components that you can build upon. You start drawing other families into the prayer, other families into the meal and the food preparation. And maybe you go in and you buy a cow together with another family. And now in the economic reality, the family's grown to include a community. And then this is what I would really like to see, even like groups of men in parishes saying, as you were saying, let's go fishing together. Let's go hunting together. Maybe we even buy a little place that we can turn into a retreat for families together. Or, hey, we have this buddy or my brother, whoever it is, he's out in the country. Let's go look at the stars, or let's have a bonfire out there and have a big feast. And so the land movement in that sense can benefit other people. More families growing organic vegetables and raising meat the right way, that can benefit people other places, and you make the connections, you get to know those people. And so once again, it's living the liturgy of the land, but just living the liturgy. So you begin then having like communal feasts for these important days together with other families, especially on the Lord's Day. There's the whole tradition I like to bring up of the agape meal. It's a meal of charity that draws people together. In a way, I think it kind of extends the communion of the Mass, and especially inviting people in need. That was a big part of the agape meal.
Yeah, I like so two things. The first is I really like that this is how I received it. The bear, the predator, nature. It's like God basically built cognitive behavioral therapy into nature, and now we all need it because we're not in nature. But moving forward from that, without hopefully going too far, you brought up Chesterton before, and Chesterton is he like a founder or like an originator of the idea of localism? But how does like you talked about the economic reality, you alluded to it. So how does this movement work with, how is it compatible with or flow out of, or however you would phrase it, localism and like subsidiarity?
Well, Chesterton, once again, in that time in the early 20th century, had to begin articulating it because until then, economics was really locally rooted. I mean, that's just how life worked. And everyone depended upon one another in their local community. Then with industrialization, you begin to have things kind of collecting in urban centers, and you really lose that connection so very often. But, they called it distributism originally. I know there's kind of a rebrand that people are trying to say localism. And I've had this conversation so many times. I don't like distributism. There's something funny going on with it. It seems like pseudo-socialistic or something. And I'm like, okay, let's just put that to the side. Do you think that economics should be local and that it should benefit families who have more productive capabilities of their own? And they're like, well, yeah, of course. I'm like, well, that's just exactly what the distributists were saying, right? Everybody gets in this idea that, distributism means that the government like takes all the land and then redistributes it. And it's like, no, no one ever said that. But, it's like there is a role for government. What do you favor? Like in taxation, for instance, the government can facilitate things like suburbanization. The government facilitated that. It made it beneficial through taxation, through transportation, so many different ways, like even helping everybody to have, subsidized mortgage and blah, 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 blah. So if the government thought that it was important for families to have productive properties such as land, which Leo the 13th said was a kind of security for families. We could do that, right? So it's just really setting priorities. And I think it's intuitive for people to understand that politics and economics should be local. It's hard for communities maybe to be completely self-sufficient. I mean, California probably could because they can grow just about anything and they can raise animals there and they, have good natural resources. But most places don't have everything, but you have a lot. And so you can, I've even laughed at this. Like I've been in places like, South Florida. I got my doctorate at Ave Maria. We were raising tomatoes and then going to the store and buying tomatoes from California. And I'm like, that makes no sense, right? It makes no sense.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yes, I mean, we should be able to have things be more participatory. Can we direct things locally, make our own decisions and direct our lives more on the ground? Like I said, I think that's just self-evident.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another thing that really stuck out to me. So it was from the first chapter. I'm on chapter 3, which is about 100 pages in. So,
it's a
not
lot of reading
terrible.
for him, Jared. It's a lot
Not
of reading
terrible.
for
My
him. to do.
introduction was pretty long. I have
I
to
enjoyed it.
acknowledge
I
that.
enjoyed it. I also really liked that chapter 3. I don't remember the author of the third essay, but he opens up with this line that's something like, "Have you ever wondered why modern life is so terrible?"
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah,
"That's hilarious."
Alan Harrelson. Yeah.
Yeah. But there was a comment made in either the first or the second essay that was.
Do you know we changed that? Sorry, I just had to say this.
Yeah.
The original was modern life sucks. We were like, let's rephrase that just a little bit. But,
right.
So it's a good change. It's a good change.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. Yeah.
I laughed. I would have laughed at either one, just so you know. But the thing that kind of caught my eye in one of the first 2 essays was this idea that the Catholic land movement is proposing a system whereby children become economic assets as opposed to liabilities. I have 2 kids, and they can't do anything yet. They're both under 3. So I'm like not really running into that problem yet. They wouldn't be able to offer me anything yet anyway.
Yeah. Your kids
and
right now are still
also-
a huge liability.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. I love them both deeply, but they're not providing. And that's probably the wrong way of saying it too, right? Because as the adult,
Participating.
yeah,
and
it
providing.
is my
Yeah.
job to provide, right? But I was really struck by that idea because it also implied that I'm going to really try and bridge a gap here. You recently wrote an article about having a pro-life culture for Denver Catholic, right? But that economic asset of children becoming an economic asset as opposed to liability, that would dramatically help, in my opinion, creating a culture of life. Right now you look at kids and they're not like, oh my gosh, I have to provide for this small human and they're not going to help me at all or participate at all, whatever you want to say it, right? So how does this whole concept, all the the economics involved and being close to the land and the natural order of things, how does that also kind of lead into that culture of life?
It is one of the great benefits of having a productive household. And it doesn't have to only be on the land, but to have a productive household fundamentally changes things, right? Rather than a consumerist household where everybody's, whether it's technology or just food or whatever, you're just consuming, and everybody's consuming their own thing. If you have a productive household, then people can participate, even young kids. Can you go get this for me? Thank you. Now I don't have to stop to work and go and get it. But, I have 4 boys and 2 girls. The girls are the oldest and the youngest. But my oldest boy, he's 19. And I'll tell you what, having, at the time, 17, 18-year-old son who was very competent, more competent than me, was very helpful. Lewis, could you try to fix this? Or, Lewis, could you take care of this? Or, whatever, fix this fence, whatever it is. Now, my next oldest son, well, he's a nerd like I am. And so he literally copy edited the American Catholic land movement,
Right.
Wow.
and, he writes things with me and, whatever. So it's kind of interesting. There's two different examples, right? My
Yeah.
household is productive in the sense of writing and producing content, and my son Daniel, who's 17 right now, he participates in that with me. And then, we're doing projects outside, and my son Lewis, and then my youngest son Colum, they're the ones that they want to get their hands dirty and fix things and build things, and it's really great to have that combination, of different skills. And so there are different ways that households can be productive. And, we have younger kids. Like, can you go pick some lettuce? Can you go get the eggs? Like my youngest daughter, right? She was afraid of the chickens sometimes. But anyway, she would go out and get the eggs for dinner and things like that. And, it's great. You get everybody involved in different ways.
Right. So my sister is a Montessori certified preschool teacher, and she sent me a quote a couple of weeks back that so my wife and I would say that my wife is more interested in Montessori than I am, but I do my best. And the quote was that we've tried to incorporate is never do something for a child that they think they can do for themselves. So it's not even a matter of whether they can do it. It's like, do they think they can? Because it leads to that growth and confidence and competency. And I'm very grateful that you just made that distinction between like, can this person go milk the cow? Sure, maybe, and like that is a skill I don't have and would be grateful if someone could provide me with milk. But also the idea that someone could participate in like an academic task, right? There are like these different, I don't know, forms of competency. No question, just a comment and gratitude.
It's reminding me of when I was a kid, my neighbor down the street, my brother and I, we used to play wiffle ball in the backyard. And one day we got it in our heads that we should really make the backyard a real baseball field. And my dad just said, go for it. And he said he lost his backyard, but he got a week of peace because we were busy every single day for hours on end, digging up the yard and making a baseball field. And we had a blast. It was fantastic. So I always go back to that. But here, all right, there is a question in here. In that place of competency and like helping to cultivate the skills that your kids can have, and understanding that within the family, everybody can contribute in some way. That contribution doesn't have to be material. It doesn't have to be financial, and this I think is an element that we so easily forget about in this Catholic land movement. How does it, I don't even have the right question here, but how do we cultivate or move in the direction of seeing, not the liability or the cost, the expense that it's going to require, but the overall asset that life is when we really welcome life into our homes.
Mm-hmm. The final chapter of the book is on sanctifying the land. So I personally wrote the introduction, kind of giving the overview of the whole movement, and then the final chapter. And I went into the Bible a lot in terms of sin polluting the land and God calling Israel to purify the land through sacrifice, but just their holy way of life. And so what I would say, and this is, I think, a really important takeaway with the American Catholic land movement, is that we are in this place in this time right now to sanctify it. And so the land movement is also just about sanctifying this place right now. Mm-hmm. You look at the sins of the Israelites, of the Canaanites that the Israelites were facing, some of it just really hits home, like child sacrifice, sexual immorality, false worship. I mean, these were the big things. And there's consequences to that. And so if these things are happening in our country, what are we doing about it? How are we responding? And I think having a family for God and recognizing that this is a spiritual task. I mentioned my wife and that she had done more homesteading in the suburbs, but it's partly because she has very serious health challenges. And so she's often in bed and she's looking out the window at her garden that she can't care for, which is torture for her. but it's a sacrifice, right? And I think that I tell her what you're doing may be more important than, my word work and, the outdoor homesteading work that, some of the boys especially are taking on. Because ultimately we are here in response to the mission that God has given us. And the fundamental mission, as I mentioned before, is be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it and have dominion over it. And that's what we can take up in our own way. And raising children for God is probably the greatest thing that we can do. Bringing these precious souls made in His image and likeness into the world who can take up and respond to this task in their own way creatively in response to His call, and finding our own ways to make this place, this land holy. That's the ultimate mission.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Creating that holiness right at home, right where you are. I'm with you there. That tracks so well. Thank you. That's great. Hey, before I have to drop out of this and let you guys finish off the interview, can I just throw out one other question here? You've got it in the book, and you made reference to it a little earlier in the interview. Wendell Berry and his work. I've done a little bit of reading with him, and I really like his style and some of the things that he gets at. Do you have a favorite Wendell Berry piece, essay, book? Do you have a suggestion for where to start reading him, and what's the best way to approach it?
So Wendell Berry is a poet, essayist, and novelist. And I think the best way just to see the whole thing come together is in one of his novels. So I would recommend the novel Hannah Coulter. And he has, this fictitious community, Port William, that is based on his particular place in Kentucky, which he cares for, right? So we even get this idea of community, of he doesn't say sanctifying, but just rightly ordering a particular place through community, right? And having this inheritance on the land and trying to figure out what to do with it, but seeing families fracture and try to come to healing across generations, all of that comes out in Hannah Coulter. So I really do think that's the best place to start. You can also just look up some of his essays online. Alistair MacIntyre, the kind of greatest Catholic philosopher of recent decades, he said that Wendell Berry was a natural Thomist, right? So he's not a Catholic, he's not writing apologetics or anything, but he understands what's wrong. That soil erosion is one of the big things that he talks about, right? We're just wasting the land that God has given us. And also just improper farming techniques, the unhealthiness of food, the disconnect between life and the land, all of that you can find in his essays. But, I think just seeing it all put together in one story is a great way to enter into it.
That's great. I love it. Thank you. Jared, I'm going to drop out here. I'll let you guys finish the interview, but thank you so much for what you're doing, and for the whole entire catalog that you've written. I'm going to go look up that beer option and have some fun.
I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thanks so much, Jared. God bless you.
You too. Thank you.
Jared, I have one final question for you before we go that hopefully will just be a kind of behind the scenes for some of our listeners. Two things. One, at Exodus, you've worked with Bishop Eric Varden, and I was curious if you had any stories that could kind of give us some insight into the man that is Bishop Eric Varden. And also, I saw online again, researching for this interview, that you had lunch with Cardinal Robert Sarah. And so same question for him. If you could just kind of give us a story, just telling us about these men. Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah. When I think of personal stories of Bishop Varden, I think of meeting him at the Cistercian monastery in Dallas and having just such a delightful lunch. I asked him way too many questions. I mean, for hours, but he's so gracious, and he just loves the Lord, loves life, and just is so ready to enter into any conversation or any project that he thinks will build up the kingdom. Mm-hmm. But during that lunch, we were just sitting there, and he was eating this ice cream that the Cistercian monks offered us called Cookie Monster. I said, I have to take a picture of it. And it's this bright blue ice cream, And Bishop Varden is just, really just a wonderful human being. You know, I mean, he loves watching movies, appreciates art and music deeply. Is just a wonderful conversationalist. But just eating that ice cream together to me just kind of summarized just
Right.
the profound humanness. And even when you read his book on chastity, it's not just all these lofty sentiments, right? He understands humanity,
Right.
like just on just such a real level. So I mean, I can't recommend his books enough. People always say, "Who's your favorite author?" And I say, "Well, living author, hands down, Bishop Eric Varden, the man who's delivering the Pope's Lenten retreat
Yes.
this
I
year."
mean, I
You know?
just saw that today that he's going to be. So is it he's the retreat master? Is that what you would call it?
Yes, you know,
That's
for the
incredible.
Pope and the Roman Curia and the cardinals living in Rome.
Yeah, that's incredible. So how about Cardinal Sarah? Any similar kind of?
Now, I had the grace and privilege of attending a private mass with Pope John Paul II when I studied in Rome. And
Whoa.
you're up there in his personal chapel with like 20 people. And, there he is kneeling down. I mean, he was just lost in prayer. And a lot of people describe that. When you see John Paul in prayer, like he's somewhere else, you know?
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
you can physically feel that presence when you're near him in prayer. And I would say there's only one other person I have ever felt that with, and that was Cardinal Robert Sarah. So
Wow.
I was able to meet with him with some of the other Exodus men at Christendom College 2.5 years ago. And just you could tangibly feel that holiness.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife even said the same thing. Like she wasn't even there for the lunch, but she just, was near him. And she said, "We're in the presence of a saint."
Wow.
And, he's not talking about land or whatever. He talks a lot about monastic life, but
Mm-hmm.
he's talking about silence.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just really see that as well, with the connection to the land, just pulling back and getting into the quiet, away from distractions, and just being
Mm-hmm.
and being able to hear the Lord's voice in silence. I love that Cardinal Sarah says, "The Lord speaks, but his language is silence." Well, if you're not silent, you're not going to hear that voice. And once again, just, going to mass with him, seeing him at prayer, that's a man who lives it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's so humble. Like he's very quiet. I mean, you have to listen to
Right.
hear him speak, right? I was sitting right next to him at lunch, and Newman was like that as well, just so soft spoken that you had to listen to hear him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But and you'd ask him something, maybe like put the spotlight on him. No, the Lord, always the Lord. Everything always coming back to the Lord. Not about him. Just so focused on prayer and holiness. I mean, it was just such an extraordinary experience to be
Yeah.
with him.
Yeah. I mean, uh, it's amazing. That's awesome. One of the things that has come to my attention as far as silence goes is this idea of like silence in the body. Like I have noticed that, what do they call us? Like navel gazers, right? When you're praying, you're looking down. And sometimes I've noticed that when I've prayed, I've like covered my head, or like covered my eyes, and you're moving your hands around. And there's kind of like a lack of silence in the body there. It can be a distraction in and of itself. And something I think that has to do with this idea of returning to the land is that when you work your body, it's easier to rest. But when you sit in front of a screen all day, your body is like naturally restless because we were made to move. Like there's so much evidence that suggests that we are healthier when we move, and so too with the spirit, right? And so like moving your body, being engaged with the land, it's not just that you're retreating into a place of silence. It's also that you're making yourself able to sit in it in the first place. Like if you haven't moved, it's going to be harder. And so like I guess even to an extent you can live out this whole idea of returning to the land and the various things that we've mentioned by like working out more. Like go and lift some weights, dude. That'll help. And I do think that actually like corresponds greatly to what Exodus does too. So what are your thoughts on that? And then I'll let you go. I know I said the previous one was the final question, but
Well, I would say that there's a connection with the land movement here as well, right? We're not living a proper human life, and part of that is the moving about. I mean, people just used to walk everywhere. Well, that in itself is like a foundation.
right.
And of course, we used to work with our hands more. Now, I work with my hands, certainly, all that typing, but that's not what we mean, right? Get up, move around. And Exodus 90 is important to help men to do that, to say we're going to, a vigorous exercise 3 days a week. And that's good to get into that foundation. And especially, in my mid 40s now, I just realize that it's just so much more necessary. When you're young, you can kind of just shrug it off. You're like, I'm fine, whatever. And you're, probably even with young kids, I was running around after them all the time anyway,
Right.
And so now it's like being on the land is good. When you are working on the land, just caring for, property and growing things and whatnot, you have to be active. But nonetheless, even still, you got to get that heart rate up. And there's just, you see that holiness and health, they are etymologically related. Wendell actually talks about that. A holy, whole, health, that there is a linguistic connection between those words. And we're not whole. We're missing things. And a lot of it is the whole body-soul connection. Because we're body-soul unity. And, the modern world says, oh, well, I don't know if I believe in the soul. But they're not so great with the body either.
Right.
And if everything's on media, right, you are just, in a way, it's navel gazing. Right?
Yeah.
You're not getting out of yourself enough
even worse.
to relate to other people, to work.
I like that. Everybody's a navel gazer. Just kind of depends on which kind.
That's
What
right.
are you doing?
Yeah.
Are you looking at your cell phone, or are you trying to talk to God? Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, Dr. Staudt, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I've personally benefited from. So thank you so much. And our listeners can find your work, specifically this work, the American Catholic Land Movement, at Tan Books. But also, like I said earlier, if you go to any Catholic publisher and type in the word Staudt, a book by Dr. Jared Staudt will pop up, almost guaranteed. So thank you so much.
You can find, my work in general at buildingcatholicculture.com. That's where I kind of just keep track of the different things I'm working on.
Perfect. Thank you. And, of course, exodus9.com, too. So, all right. Thank you, Dr. Staudt.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Of course. Thanks for watching today's video. Let us know what you thought down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe.